Live. Sorry for that terrible fiasco of going live, but so glad you could join me today on the MMA Eco Live podcast. It is Thursday, January 25th, 2024, and I'm coming to you live from beautiful Portland, Oregon for the 41st episode of the MMA Eco Live podcast. A little bit of a fiasco getting set up with the tech today. My laptop has been on the struggle bus this week. If I'm like running a bunch of apps and then I close the lid, it will go into this supercharged overheating mode if I leave it be in my backpack for a while. So that was what happened today. 30 minutes before the show, I set things up and I almost dropped my laptop on the floor because it was so hot. So it is still recovering from that, but no matter, we're going to have a great show today. I've got the chat able to see from my vantage point here on my phone, and thankful to have a good camera as well. And honestly, having a backup plan really helps, even if you have to start the show a few minutes late. But nonetheless, if you are new to the show, basically how this works is I go through the Asian MMA schedule for the upcoming weekend, highlight things I think you should know about, and then get into your questions. You can drop any questions you want regarding Asian MMA, MMA in general, or even outside of MMA, whatever you want. And yeah, so here we go. Usually I've got some titles on the screen and kind of guiding you through things, but that is all through my streaming software on my laptop. So just imagine little headings up on your screen, and I'll try to keep this nice and organized. So first up, and in case you guys didn't know, by now you're the faithful MMA ecosystem audience, so you know how this works. But I do have a new website that is live, MMAecosystem.com. I have kind of been telling people here and there about it, and I'll make a bigger push on my socials in a little bit. But what you can do, you can actually follow along with me in this podcast. I literally pulled up the calendar section of the MMA ecosystem website, and I'm just going through the next couple days. So it's almost like you're going with me through my show notes on here, and I will highlight a couple things. I didn't even think about how handy that is to have publicly available as I'm going through it as well. Usually I have this open on a document, but now you all get to see the document with me. Tomorrow, from Indonesia, Bali, Indonesia, we've got Soma Fight Series 11 going down from the Soma Fight Gym in Bali, Indonesia. And kind of how this works is you've got Soma Fight Club, you've got Bali MMA, both kind of having their own promotions run out of their gym. They're inviting other Indonesian fighters from around the country and even bringing in some international fighters to put up against their own. So really cool, this kind of circuit that they've got going on. And I am planning a trip to hopefully go to Indonesia later this year. And guys, I pulled up I was just like, out of curiosity, how close are these two gyms to each other? They're literally on the same block, Soma Fight Club and Bali MMA. You could probably throw a rock from one gym to the other. I thought that was really kind of funny how close they are together. But they've got an event going on from their gym tomorrow. And, usually an in-house, in-gym event maybe wouldn't be worth mentioning, but they've got a couple prospects that I'll mention to you. A lot of these fighters are pretty young in their career, but in the main event, you've got there's two Indonesian fighters I'm going to put on your radar here. The first one is this guy named Fajar. I think his nickname is Macho Fajar. He's a really fun fighter above all else. He's fought for, I believe, one Warrior Series. He's fought for Brave. He fought at the most recent Brave Indonesia show and had a great performance there. So he's a really fun fighter. Don't know if he's going to be like a future UFC fighter or anything like that, but he's got a pretty good record. I believe he's 5-1 and a really fun guy to watch. Also, there's a female fighter who trains out of Soma Fight named Febi Mamu Aya. Not sure how to pronounce that. She is also high up on that card. She's another Indonesian prospect I've got my eye on as well. You see some of these female Indonesian fighters fighting for One Pride MMA belts after just 2 or 3 fights. So really just a few fights under your belt as an Indonesian female, and you could go pretty far, especially within the country of Indonesia. So that I don't think that they air these fights, which would honestly be going above and beyond being run out of their gym. So I don't think there's going to be any way to follow those live unless they post them on their social media, their results live as they happen. Otherwise, those will be on their YouTube channel after the fact. Also, this weekend, we've got a pretty interesting fight going down in China from JCK. They're holding JCK Kings 3 in their JCK headquarters. In the main event of JCK Kings 3 is a really, really awesome lightweight title fight for against, or I should say between Balajin and Aili Mulatabieka. Honestly, these guys may be two of the best Chinese-born fighters training in China right now. I say that with that caveat because I'm also including Adiz Kadarov, who is a Tajik that lives in China, has fought for JCK. Honestly, I need to follow up with him because we went back and forth a little bit talking about why he basically wasn't included in this. I need to get a little bit more clarity from him and just what the latest is with Aziz. But basically Aziz, he went through the tournament, the lightweight tournament for JCK, and then in the semifinal round, his opponent dropped out. They brought in another guy. I think he either dropped out or missed weight. Can't really remember. And then he, I think, was kind of left in the dark about what's going on next. And curiously, he is not a part of this vacant title fight for the lightweight title. So I need to follow up with him and see what the latest is with him. He's a very good fighter, and I could definitely see him being on the UFC radar. He is a UFC Shanghai PI guy, has been for a long time. So he's kind of the asterisk on this whole thing. But nonetheless, a title fight between Balajin and Aili Mulatabieka. Really, really interesting. Two of the best prospects out of China. Both have been near the top of my list, especially Mulatabieka has been up there for a while. He recently fought and lost to Aziz Kadarov and was basically just kind of out-wrestled in that fight, which is an amazing feat considering how good of a wrestler and how strong of a guy he is in his own right. So Balajin may try to run that playbook against him, but I don't know if Balajin is as good of a wrestler as Aziz Kadarov is. So otherwise, we may end up seeing a striking fight. And Balajin, he has been training out of Sunken Fight out of Pattaya, Thailand. And I think he's been getting a lot better there. He looked really good in his last fight with JCK. Really good striking, and I think this is a really hard fight to call, so I'm not even going to make a prediction there. Looking forward to that. You've also got Johar Biekenuar on the card. He's fighting a Kazakh guy named Yernaz Musabek. So that fight is the co-main event. Other than that, not a whole lot going on this card. Liu Yongqiang could be a prospect to watch. I think that's at flyweight. Otherwise, going down this weekend, I'll get to 165 last. Ailash Pride FC 93 going down from Shymkent, Kazakhstan. There's an article on the website about this, but Ruslan Saryev was supposed to fight a guy named Ilama Yamin Javatov out of Russia in the main event for the interim flyweight strap, which I think I missed something there. Sanjar Adilov recently won the belt against, neither here nor there, but Adilov is the champion. Not really sure why they're having an interim flyweight title fight unless Adilov has signed with another promotion already. So, but yeah, anyways, that fight was supposed to go down between Saryev and Javatov, which they fought last year in July, and Javatov choked him out, but held onto the choke too long and was disqualified. The ref basically couldn't break him apart, and he got disqualified for that. So that would have been a really interesting rematch for a belt, but unfortunately that's going to have to wait. They brought in this other guy, Vanderlei Jr. out of Brazil, and they're going to fight for the interim flyweight title. But also on the card, probably the guy that I'm most interested in on this card is Bargung Jelaisa. His Kazakh name is Bargung Genesuli. I believe that's how you say it. So he's a Road to UFC alum, really strong guy, really one of the top prospects out of the UFC PI, coming off a win at UAE Warriors. And I think if he probably wins this, he'd be back in the Road to UFC tournament for 2024. Which, by the way, we did get a little bit of news from that from our favorite Japanese MMA manager, Shu Hirata, saying that casting and scouting was currently underway for Road to UFC's newest season. He says they think that they'll probably start the season end of May, similar to previous years. So he did say that they were looking at flyweight all the way up to welterweight and women's strawweight and flyweight, which makes a lot more sense than just flyweight. I don't know why they didn't do strawweight. I would be surprised if they did a flyweight season this year. Don't think there's enough women in Asia to fill that out. Unless they're adamant on putting Wang Tsong in there, they could be trying to build it around her. Maybe, it just seems unfair to put someone like Rin Nakai in Road to UFC against other fighters who only have a few fights to their name, but I don't know, maybe wouldn't put it past them. They've put other pretty experienced fighters through Road to UFC before. But anyways, kind of a rabbit trail there. Ailash Pride FC 93 going down this Sunday. Catch that live on their YouTube channel. Takuma Sudo fights Nobuki Fujii in the main event of Shudo Volume 2 of their 2024 season, going down from Tokyo. That is for the bantamweight title fight. I've kind of like Takuma Sudo goes by the nickname Leg Hunter because he's got a lot of leg lock submissions under his name. He's a young guy. If he fills out the rest of his MMA game, he could be a good prospect out of Japan. So this is a good fight for him, taking a bantamweight title shot. Let's move on to One Championship, 165, going down this Sunday from the Ariake Arena in Tokyo, Japan. About a 10,000 seat arena that 15,000 seat arena. Probably be a little bit less than that. It looks like they've got the arena, about a third of the arena blocked off, so probably somewhere around 10,000. I checked the ticket sales today, and there's still quite a few tickets to be sold. I'm not sure if they're going to end up doing a lot of comp tickets kind of at the last minute, but either way, you've got this main event of Takeru Sagawa fighting Superlek, which honestly is probably a pretty big fight, and I would say should be a competitive fight. I'm not going to break down that fight in this video, as I'm going to focus on the MMA side. However, I can probably guarantee you it's going to be a very exciting fight. But let's get into the MMA fights, because there are some really good MMA fights on this card. Let's start from the bottom going upwards. I'm not going to spend too much time on each one, but I do want to comment on them because I really like some of these fights. So opening up the event is Gustavo Ballart fighting Hirobe Minowa. And there's two strawweight fights on this card featuring mostly ranked fighters. And for this fight, got Ballart, who's on a 3-fight win streak, fighting Minowa, who's on a 2-fight losing streak. Honestly, not a huge fan of this matchmaking, as I feel like Ballart should have got someone. I mean, they're both ranked, but Ballart really, I think, deserves someone that's higher up in the weight class. I would have loved to see him fight like a Joshua Pasio, but they booked that rematch. And I've covered why I think one is handcuffed a lot of the times with their matchmaking. I covered that a little bit in my deeper video about One Championship, but essentially they don't always have a lot of options for matchmaking beyond a lot of rematches. So this may have been the only option available, but I don't like it not only because of the record, but also because I feel like in Minowa's last 2 fights, he's fought pretty good wrestlers and been beaten that way, falling to Jared Brooks and Bokong Masunyane. And Gustavo Ballart is a really good wrestler, Cuban guy, 4'11", really interesting, entertaining guy to watch. But I don't think this is a good matchup for Minowa, who is a good grappler, but I think he's going to be overpowered by Ballart. Could always pull out the submission, but I think this is going to be a decision win for Ballart. And I believe this should probably solidify Gustavo Ballart as the next title challenger, as he'll be on a 4-fight win streak. And so strawweight, I think probably your next title challenger going to be Ballart, probably winning this handily by decision, unless Minowa has got some tricks up his sleeve. So moving on to the next one, the other strawweight fight, Keito Yamakita versus Bokong Masunyane. I actually do really like this fight a lot. Keito Yamakita, I think he is a really good prospect, really good grappler, good wrestler, scrambles really well and really fast on the ground, and could be honestly a really great prospect for Japan going forward. I think this is a great test for Yamakita and one of the better fights on the card as a whole. Both guys are really fast-paced, really strong, really good at scrambling. But I think if I had to choose one fighter in this fight to win, probably going to side towards Masunyane. He is also a really good wrestler in his own right, and I think just a little bit quicker than Yamakita and a little bit more explosive, and he's got that knockout power on his feet. So kind of, I don't know if either guy's going to be able to score a takedown. If not, I side with Masunyane to get the better of the strikes, the more powerful strikes, which matters a lot more in one championship. You land one blow that knocks your opponent down, and you could win the whole fight just off of that one blow. So I think because of that, I'm going to side ever so slightly towards Masunyane, but I think there's a good chance at the end of this fight you could see both guys thinking that they won the fight. Could be back and forth, a lot of scrambles. So this one should be really exciting. Moving up the card, we've got, this is an interesting one. Martin Nguyen versus Gary Tonin. And again, like, this fight could determine who is next in line at featherweight. Martin Nguyen, he's one of those guys. He almost was a 3-weight champion at one point. So you got to think he's one of those guys that is always just maybe 2 wins away from, even if he's on a losing streak, he gets 2 more in the bag and he could be right back in there for a title shot. One of the longest tenured guys in one championship, and Gary Tonin is a really tough test for anybody. Basically, it comes down to, can Martin Nguyen avoid the takedown? Overall, his takedown defense is pretty good, but Gary Tonin, one of those guys like Ryan Hall, who's just really good at dragging you down to the ground and tricking you into a grappling exchange. Overall, if you put a gun to my head and made me choose who's going to win this fight, I'd probably lean ever so slightly towards Tonin to get a submission maybe in round 2. But I think Martin Nguyen, he's a smart guy, and I think he may defend a takedown or 2, but it just takes one time for Gary Tonin to get you to the ground and get you in a leg lock, something like that. So I'm going to lean towards Gary Tonin here. But Martin Nguyen is one of those guys that is so easy to pull for. Would love to see him have another title run back in him. Moving up, we've got Itsuki Hirata versus Ayaka Miura. Miura is dropping down back to one championships, atom weight, 115 pounds. And, I wonder if it's one of those situations where she maybe didn't have a choice, because she beats Meng Bo and then really is the only viable contender for Xiong Jingnan. But the problem is that they've recently fought already, and Xiong won a pretty uninspiring decision over Ayaka Miura. So kind of hard to sell that fight again. And if not that, there's no other contenders for her to fight. at strawweight. So I feel like she really only had one option, and that was to move down to atomweight. And I think this is a pretty, it may not always be a pretty fight, but I think it is an interesting fight in that I feel like it's a hard one to pick. Itsuki Hirata has been compared to Paige Van Zandt several times. I think John Hyun Ko was the first guy to do that. She has sometimes been a little bit of a one-note wrestler that doesn't always have a lot of options on the ground once she gets there, and I think has a lot of natural physical abilities. She can have pretty good explosive power in her hands if she's able to find the mark. But overall, I think the way this fight is either going to go is Hirata's going to spin the fight on top, avoiding submissions, or Ayaka Miura is going to be able to find a submission off her back. And so either way, I think that Miura is going to present more pathways to a submission finish, whether she is able to get a judo throw and land on top, which I think is more likely that we see Hirata landing a takedown, or trying to just strike. She may try to strike with Miura, maybe the more likely outcome. If that's the case, Hirata could land the stronger punches and win a decision that way. Kind of depends on how she's going to approach this fight. I think it is incumbent on Hirata to decide where the fight takes place. But if it goes to the ground at all, I favor Miura to win. So because of that, I think I favor Miura to either win a decision based off of submission attempts or potentially even get the submission finish. So I'll lean towards Ayaka Miura in this fight. Yuya Wakamatsu versus Danny Kingod. This is a hard one to predict as well. They have fought before, and that was a really exciting fight. Wakamatsu has really heavy hands, was able to drop Danny Kingod in that fight. Kingod almost finished him with submissions. I think I'll probably just, and that was a couple years ago, but I will probably still lean with Danny Kingod. I think that he is still growing and evolving, and he's a very talented fighter, whereas Wakamatsu has a few more holes in his game. And I think probably Kingod's going to use his grappling to win this fight, perhaps by decision once again. Wouldn't be surprised to see a Wakamatsu finish with strikes, though. And then that leaves us with Sage Northcutt versus Shinya Aoki. You know, a couple years ago when this fight was kind of pitched, when these two kind of had that that really funny exchange on Twitter, a lot of people were, One Championship tried to make that fight, but at that time, folks were saying this is a bad matchup for Sage. He's going to get trashed in this fight. Now I think that narrative has calmed down a little bit. Now that Shinya Aoki is older and Sage Northcutt is more into his prime, coming off of a win over Ahmed Mujtaba. So it's honestly such a hard fight to pick. If I had to pick, I would pick Shinya Aoki by submission. I mean, the guy is so crafty, and we know like so many Japanese fighters just refuse to go away even in their old age, and you can't count them out. So I feel like Sage definitely could finish Aoki with strikes, but if it goes to the ground at all, I feel like Aoki's going to throw something up and he's going to get that submission finish. So I mean, it's such an unpredictable fight. Both guys are so unpredictable and could be in a bad situation quickly. And it's so hard to shake the image of the Cosmo Alexandre fight when Sage got wrecked there. Sage is a pretty good grappler, but Aoki is just always so crafty. So I'm gonna lean towards him in this fight. Gonna lean towards Aoki, but Sage could finally break through. We still don't know how good Sage Northcutt can be. And it still could be a few years before we're able to answer that question once he firmly gets into his prime. So I think that this is the right time for that fight. I think a couple years ago, something just kind of fell off about matchmaking those two. So that should be a good fight. There you have it. There's 165, and hope you enjoy the card. Honestly, a lot of people are complaining about the putting this fight on pay-per-view, charging $40 USD for it. Is it worth that? Well, if you're a big Takeru fan, it may be worth it for you. Only you can decide if it's worth it for you. Sometimes I think pay-per-views can ruin and spoil a fan perception of a card. Whereas it's like if this wasn't on pay-per-view, I think almost this fight would be getting more buzz. More people would be excited about the card. Granted, at least in the US and the Western Hemisphere, it comes on at a really difficult time. It starts at 12:30 a.m. Pacific, 3:30 a.m. Eastern. Not that hardcore fans aren't accustomed to watching Ryzen, but I'm just curious to see how many fans in the Western Hemisphere actually stay up to watch this card or wake up early to watch this card and pay $40. Usually even these Ryzen cards are just $20. So I'm curious. It's a shame though, because if you just look at these fights, it's a really fun event. You've also got which take it or leave it, a grappling title fight, the Takeru fight as well, some kickboxing fights that could be fun. So sometimes it's a shame that pay-per-view prices can kind of spoil a perception of a card. But either way, I think that we should get a lot of fun results from 1/165. All right, let us step into your questions. Let me see if I can pull these up or if I need to go onto the live stream. I may need to just do that. Give me a second while I pull that up. Feel free to drop your questions if you want to. I need to get to a couple news items just real quick. So next week we have Road to UFC Finals. Working on scripting a video on that, coming out a little bit later than I would have liked. I've been just working on some other things, having to finish up some other things in the meantime. So hopefully get out to you guys by Monday or so, Tuesday at the latest. I am going to be on another guy's podcast. I believe his channel is 138 MMA, but I'm going to be, I'll tweet out the details of that. But Tuesday evening at 6:15 or 6:30 Pacific time PM, I'm going to go live with this guy and talk about Road to UFC. So that should be fun. A few news items. Speaking of Road to UFC, I mentioned earlier this week that the bantamweight title fight, the bantamweight title, the final between, I'm multitasking here. The bantamweight final between Xiaolong and Lee Chong-ho, at the very least, has been postponed. That is due to an injury and visa problems with Xiaolong. And if you notice, so far the UFC has not... You go to UFC.com, Road to UFC Finals, nowhere to be found. ESPN, UFC Fight Pass, nowhere to be found. And folks have asked me, is this even still happening? Is this event still happening? And it absolutely is. I'll give you one scenario where they could change it, but it is still happening. I think the reason why you are not seeing this on websites is because they are basically trying to figure out what to do with this bantamweight final, because they could postpone it, but they could also, there is an option I've heard to get a replacement to fight Lee Chong-ho next week. That would really suck for Xiaolong as he fought his way to the finals of the tournament, but it would at least give Lee Chong-ho a chance to fight next week and give a weird resolution, but a resolution nevertheless, to the tournament so they can put this season behind them. So I think that's probably why you haven't heard anything, is because they're still sorting that out, and most likely that is a complicated process, getting visas, getting everything figured out. So that is what's going on with that. They could also just postpone it. I would think they would just put that bantamweight final either at another Apex event as soon as Xiaolong is able, or even just put it on whatever the next UFC event in the Asia region, Asia or UFC Riyadh, something like that. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. There was a really good chance that I was going to go to Las Vegas next week and cover Road to UFC finals as media. And that is not going to happen, at least as media, which is totally unsurprising. I think it was all just credentials. And I told you guys that there was a guy in leadership at the UFC Shanghai PI that was campaigning for me, trying to get me credentials. But I understand. I mean, I'm a small channel. I just launched my website. UFC media credentials really hard to come by. But either way, I've got my foot in the door for the future. If it's possible, I'm going to still try to go, even for just 3 fights. I'm going to try to just go to the Apex and catch these fights live if I can just get in the door and sit and watch them. But as you know, there's it's hard to even find out what's going on at the event right now. The only situation where I would see where they would postpone the whole thing as a whole, if there was another fight that fell out, I don't know if they would. It's would they really even just have the 2 fights? I don't know. Maybe they would just move those onto the prelims of the UFC card earlier that day. It's all a moving target. So either way, I have an open invitation whenever I can get over to China to tour the UFC Shanghai PI, do video, hang out with athletes, all that stuff. That invitation stands, and not a bad thing to have in your pocket in the future, applying for media credentials if situation improves. So overall, a win. Let's get to your questions. So Gene, you said, and sorry, I can't put these questions up on the screen because streaming software is unavailable. But you said, I'm starting at the top here. I think you misunderstood my question about middleweight being one-sided last week. Maybe. One-sided means they're all well-rounded and have a skill they are good at, but in that skill, they are flawed. For example, Roman Kopylov, who is really skilled everywhere, has good striking, but striking is also his biggest weakness. It's very complicated definition, but do you think that this is true? Well, for the one, think about this, for example. Think about how much the title has changed hands at middleweight in the last year. 1 year ago, Alex Pereira was the champ. UFC 287, April, Israel Adesanya gets revenge, beats him. September, UFC, 293, Sean Strickland wins the decision against Adesanya, takes the belt. And then Duplessis wins the belt this last Saturday. And so we've had 3 title changes in less than a year. Pretty crazy stuff. I think it's hard to make a sweeping generalization for the whole division. The division has so many fighters in it. There are fighters in that division, I will agree with you maybe and say they are good at a lot of things, but nothing really stands out about their game. I feel like Robert Whittaker is one of the most well-rounded fighters in the game, but nothing just totally stands out where he's going to dominate in any one area. Marvin Vettori kind of feels that way too. You mentioned Roman Kopylov, who has really good striking offense, but not the best striking defense. Then you've got Adesanya, who is... I feel like he's totally in a different category. It's hard for me to make a sweeping generalization over the whole division, but because I feel like you can find fighters like that in every single division. But middleweight is definitely a weird division. It's been weird for a couple years. It was stagnant, and now it's just it's moving so quickly, and there's so much turnover. Honestly, I'm really enjoying middleweight. It's quickly become one of the most interesting divisions in the UFC. Maybe not the most talent stacked deep, but one of the most interesting just because there's so much turnover. And now there are so many interesting matches. I think we're going to see a middleweight title fight in the main event of UFC 300. Either we're going to see, I think, Dracus versus Adesanya. I think they're going to find a way to pull all the strings and make it happen. Or you're going to see Duplessis versus Chimaev. And it was Danny Rubenstein, the Ruby Sports guy who's the manager of Duplessis. He was on the Anik and Florian podcast either today or yesterday, and he said, like, yeah, 300 is an option. Just kind of have to check and see if he's healthy. Ideally, it would be later, but Duplessis wants to fight at 300 if he can. And I think Duplessis versus Adesanya will be the perfect main event for 300, considering all the options that are realistic. That's the one that I would like to see happen. Chimaev versus Duplessis would be really interesting too. So either way, I think middleweight is an interesting division though. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm not sure it did. Hello, Chris. Congrats on the new website. Thanks a lot. I really like how simple it is. And sorry, that was weird. Really like how simple it is and easy to follow. It's MMAecosystem.com, where if you do visit gyms like Bali MMA, you will post about your experience there in article form. Well, if I did that, I would do a YouTube video. So all the like deep dive kind of stuff is still going to be on YouTube. But if I were to go there, I'd probably do some kind of article too. It's really easy for me to get over ambitious. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this. Especially if I'm like making a trip to Indonesia to go to Bali MMA, I'm going to try and cram as much as I can in there. So, but I would definitely do a lot of photo and video if I did a trip like that. I think that would be the main focus is photo and video. Basically, like, I mean, I mean, I hate to boil this all down to money, but it's like because I would enjoy both. I would enjoy writing both. But if I'm going to make a lot more off of ad revenue, off of a YouTube video, then that's what I'm going to sink the effort into. Whereas I just don't have the data yet of ad revenue really on either side, but like an article versus a YouTube video. So I think what I would probably like to do is just do some kind of like feature, something like that, or transcribe an interview that I do with a fighter, filming a video with a fighter doing an interview, and then posting a transcript or writing an article off of that. So yeah, let's see. Speaking of Chinese MMA, I saw the fight between Wang Song and Wu Yanan, and it was exactly what I expected. Would she do road to UFC? Personally, I think they should do. I think that they should just sign her to the UFC. Is what I think. I know that she's only 3-0, right? 3-0 as a pro, but other fighters of similar experience have been signed, but she has all the kickboxing experience. So I feel like she's proved to me that she could probably beat a good portion of the UFC flyweight roster. At the very least, I mean, think of all the fighters that are less ready for the UFC that the UFC has signed. And that was very dominant over Wu Yanan. Very dominant. And yeah, honestly, the fight played out similar to how I thought too. Wang Song's takedown defense held up really well. That was really impressive and just really lopsided on the feet. There was even, I saw someone on Chinese social media post a comparison video or a comparison photo between, I think it was the Lucy Pudilova fight maybe, and the Wang Song fight, but it was literally the exact same position where Wu Yanan is like kind of turtled up, but kind of like squatted down and turtled up. And then the Wang or Pudilova or whoever was kind of on her back, like either going for a choke. It was like the exact same position. I thought that was really interesting, but not the best performance from Wu Yanan. ring rust. I don't know. But Wang Tong, I think, is ready for the UFC. Running through Road to UFC wouldn't hurt, just to get even more reps, be able to build her up even more, get people interested in Road to UFC. I don't know. I don't know if it would catch on with English speaking audience more that way, but I hope they just sign her. What are we waiting for? Just sign her. Let's see. Cheyenne, hoping and praying UFC Kazakhstan happens this year. COVID really messed things up last time it was scheduled. Totally. Who is it? It was an interview between John Hyun Ko and Sayat, another Ruby Sports guy, where he asked Sayat about, is UFC Kazakhstan going to happen? And Sayat said, yeah, they were trying to go there a couple years ago, but COVID, and then it could happen this year, but it could also happen somewhere else in the region. So that was interesting to me that he opened it wider than just Kazakhstan. I feel like it would either be Kazakhstan or Tajikistan. I'd have to do some research to see if there's a good venue for the UFC in Tajikistan and Dushanbe. But I don't know what the UFC is waiting for Kazakhstan. They've got the roster. They've got tons of well-liked fighters. They've got Shavkat Rakhmonov that they could put in the main event, Sora Rakhmonova, and tons of other Kazakh fighters. They could almost have a Kazakh in every single fight if they wanted to. And I think they've got some. I mean, well, yeah, they've got the Almaty Arena, which is where they were going to go in 2020. So they already have a good arena. I don't know what's taking so long, but Tajikistan seems like the fan response is like massive in Tajikistan. We saw that with like Nurullo Aliyev, and some fighters from that country have a really big following. So that's the only other place I could see. I don't think that there's any good venues that the UFC would consider in Bishkek or Uzbekistan, Tashkent, Uzbekistan, or yeah, I think I've looked into that a little bit, but probably either UFC Dushanbe or UFC Almaty is what you'll see. Hopefully that happens this year. Did you see John Anik's comments on the MMA fan page? I did. Is it sad to see one of the most recognizable voices in the sport leave because the Strickland fan base toxicity? I was actually talking about this with my wife yesterday about like getting sucked into the internet and social media. It's like, I was like, honestly, when I saw that, I was like, shoot, man, if John Anik leaves, am I out too? Like, do I want to be in this? I mean, the thing about John Anik is that he is like the UFC, he is the MMA commentator that MMA needs, but not the one that we deserve. He is just like, he's too good for MMA. Just the level of professionalism that he has and the clarity and the passion that he has, the work ethic, like it's not that other people on screen don't share that same talent, but like he is just like the full package. And I would be seriously depressed if John Anik ever left. I feel like, I mean, I can't tell John Anik what to do, but I would honestly just be like, man, I feel like it might be best for you just to like stay off social media. Like, it's a good, I mean, we all want to be like connected to the fan base. We all want to like be in those conversations, but we also have to have limits. And when you realize how much, and I don't think John Anik is a weak person at all for letting that get to him, because he puts so much into it. I mean, if you listen to interviews with John Anik, it is one of the first things you pick up how obsessed he is with getting every detail right and studying and being prepared. almost to like an unhealthy level. And I think just the dark side of that is the MMA fan base can be brutal, and it's hard. It is challenging being in a sport where I feel like the MMA fan base has a really hard time with opinions, with differing opinions. And I can get sucked into this too sometimes too. And I think part of that is because I'm part of the fan base and this is just the current of things. But it is so, when someone presents an opinion that conflicts with your favorite fighter, your opinion, who you think won, MMA fans, not everybody, but so many of them take that as like a personal attack that they have to defend themselves. And it's hard for so many fans to separate the fact that this overall is a sport and a game, and it's meant for us to just have fun with. It's hard for them to separate that with like their passion for individual athletes. And I don't think a lot of people have the skill of being able to hear and digest opposing opinions and to hold those with an open hand and not take that personally. I wish that that was a greater competency among MMA fans. And, you know, I say that, but like if someone attacks, or not even attacks, I mean, John Anik was not attacking Sean Strickland. He merely thought that the fight could have been scored for him and should have been scored for him, which I don't think is a controversial opinion at all. But I think, yeah, it feels like that can feel like an attack on something you really love, but it's not. I mean, especially John Anik, like, and I guarantee you, if John Anik was in a room with all these MMA fans and they were talking about the fight, it would be the most jovial, like, respectful conversation. But it's what the internet does to us. And you know, I have friends that I see at coffee shops or out in public at different social functions that they know me as the MMA guy, and they have their favorite fighters, and they ask me who I thought won the fight. I had people asking me that I ran into, asking about the Sean Strickland Dracus du Plessis fight, and I gave my opinion. They're like, "Oh, I kind of thought this person won," but you know, it was a respectful conversation, and it was fun because we're friends. But man, it's just like the internet is just a totally different beast and brings out a really bad side in us. And I hope, you know, whether it's with MMA or if it's with politics, sometimes we just need to set boundaries for ourselves when we find ourselves getting too sucked in and too emotionally involved and like bummed out and depressed. I mean, I do that with the news. Like especially with political cycles, I can get sucked into who's winning the polls and who's going to win the election and debates and things like that. And honestly, I've set boundaries for myself of like, I'm going to read the news every day during breakfast, but I'm not going to spend any other time throughout the day on the news. I'm setting hard boundaries for myself. I'm containing my news consumption time to this little time in the morning when I'm kind of multitasking something. And I think that has really helped me to not like be one of these people that is just constantly digesting the news, getting bummed out about sad and depressing things that are happening in the world. So, yeah, all the best to John Anik. We support you, brother. All right. Would you call 2015 to 2021 the hot era of MMA? Interesting. Would you just describe 2022 and onwards engagement bait area as in both differ because hot take era were just face value arguments, where engagement era about nonsensical lists, hyperbole, and fetishization of fighter skills? Oh, that's an interesting opinion. It probably depends on who you ask and how long they've been an MMA fan. I started watching MMA in 2007. Anderson Silva was a champion. Randy Couture was a champion. Rampage was a UFC champion. And for me, the hot era of MMA was like 2008 to 2012. And I think the reason I say that is because that's like an era of nostalgia for me. That was when I was getting into MMA. Talking about limits, my limits knew no bounds. I would literally just sit on my computer for hours, even refreshing pages like MMA Junkie for news. And you had Brock Lesnar in that era. Yeah, I mean, that was pre Conor McGregor. That, I feel like, was a really hot era of MMA. We only had like 2 UFC events a month, usually just like a pay-per-view and then maybe a fight night card. Ultimate Fighter I was really into that. That was a fun time to be into Ultimate Fighter. And it felt like UFC was transitioning from a US only promotion and for the first time was becoming international. 2008, they had their first event in Canada. 2011, they went back to Brazil for the first time since the early days. They went to Abu Dhabi for the first time. They were going to England for the first time in that era. So, or I guess not for the first time, but kind of a little bit more regularly, making a big comeback. So that felt like a hot era for me. Gosh, I feel like I could just go on. BJ Penn was on a roll. George St. Pierre, that was his big time too. A lot of just really dominant champions. But I could definitely see how 2015, I would say to like 2018, was another really, really amazing time for MMA because, why? Because you had Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, and John Jones. John Jones kind of hit or miss. That was in a lot of his kind of PED era, but and all the other stuff, troubles with the law. But at least you had Rousey and McGregor, and just those two just could not miss in terms of putting on entertaining shows for the fans. That was a lot of fun too. It seems like you're kind of referring almost more to like a news and media era, but I can see how that trickles out to how fighters carry themselves and promote themselves too. I do think that there will be really positive things that we look back on from this time. I think the middleweight, even just like the last year at middleweight, the Adesanya Pereira rivalry has been really fun, which may not even be over yet. There's definitely fun things at all times, but right now we are in a little bit of a sag in terms of megastars. Gosh, who knows what's going to happen with McGregor in the future, but right now there's no Khabib, there's no Conor McGregor, no Rousey, none of these like ultra stars. But I mean, definitely fighters that have massive followings, but nothing that feels like a McGregor or Rousey, at least in my opinion. That's the only reason I would say things are a little bit different. And I think also being in the Apex era has been a little bit of a downer. I would say that has definitely impacted my enthusiasm for the sport. Oh, and a lot of people have said a lot of things about this, but mainly just to sum that up briefly, I miss every single UFC event being in front of a massive live audience. Even if that was 6,000 people in Boise, Idaho, there was still an energy around that. And having every single card, having fighters from that locale, even if there was a little bit of oversaturation going on, at least it was fun to see the UFC just bouncing around all over the world. And it's just like half the cards we're getting now are basically just evolved Contender Series, which I still tune into those cards. There's still lots of great things to like from those cards. I still look forward to them, but it doesn't carry the same zing that going to Zagreb, Croatia, or going to China had for me. And I don't know if they'll ever get back to that, Dana keeps saying that they're going to do that. And an update on the UFC Apex, someone asked about that at a recent press conference, and he said, we are going to get out more, but he also said we're going to be doing construction on the Apex to expand it and make the seating a lot bigger. So we're going to have to get out a little bit more, which was a little bit of a double-edged sword, because I'm like, it sounds like getting out more may just be a provision so that you can host more people in the Apex, since you may have events more regularly. So I still hold by, like, I wouldn't mind having one Apex event per quarter, maybe 3 a year. But I miss that time. I miss the time of globetrotting personally. Sorry, I didn't really touch on like what you said about engagement. Yeah, I mean, you're right about that, and part of that's just the general trends of social media, algorithms, all that stuff has trickled down into our sport as well. And I don't love that. Sorry, I don't love that, but it is what it is. I don't think that it's affected the fights that we get too much, fortunately, but I definitely don't tune into like a lot of the interviews and pre-fight stuff as much as I used to. That's for sure. Have a clever pun this week. The middleweight division is looking bleak. How does your website make money? Do you have sponsors or ad revenue? So the way that you make money off a website is off ad revenue. Right now, there are not ads on the website. So you have to, the way it works with Google Ads is that, and anyone can do this. You could set up a blog for whatever you want, and then go set up a Google AdSense account, apply. You basically have to meet, I think, some qualifications, which some of them feel a little bit loose to me. It's like quality content. What does that really mean? But like, I think a little bit of, like, you have to have enough content. Like if you just have a main page with no articles, you're not going to get it, which is partially why, even dating back to early December, I was already writing articles and putting them on the website, just so when the website went live, there'd be a big backlog of articles, and there's already like 40 articles on the website. But yeah, you can sign up for a Google AdSense account, and then they actually put ads on your website, and you make money off of that based off of traffic. So that is how you make money, and that's how a lot of MMA media websites make money as well. You can do sponsors, but as a media website, I think you want to be a little bit careful with that. You gotta, if you're gonna make deals with people, you have to make deals that make sense. I would say like clothing deals would make sense, like clothing and gear would make sense. It is probably ill-advised to like, partner, especially having either an exchange of services or an exchange of money with like a promotion to get access and favorable coverage. So I know there are some MMA media websites that have done that with one championship, but so yeah, sponsors is different. But if you're like a blogger where it's more about like you and your personality, then the door is a lot more open for you to have like brand deals. But as a media website, you're probably just gonna, but what you could also do is you can, rather than having Google put ads on there, you can also have your own ads on there too. If I were to make a deal with an MMA gear company, I could like manually put their ads on there for an exchange of money. But I think for that, you have to be able to like prove that you have the traffic to justify that. So traffic is something that's going to build up over time as people get in the habit of using your website, which honestly, like, I'm pretty pleased with the traffic I've gotten so far. I haven't even really pushed the website that much. I mean, if I tweet a news article. Like if I tweet something in the news, a lot of times I'll include a link to an article with it, but I haven't really like pushed the website yet, beyond posting a YouTube video yesterday about it. So that's how it makes money. The hope is that between YouTube and between ad revenue on the website, that there would be a pretty significant, or at least like a solid income that would grow over time and allow me to give more time and resources towards it. So yeah, it's cyclical. Also, what do you think of Whaley going to a GSP seminar? Do you find it odd that even a world champion is willing to learn from so many different people, like you mentioned in your video about training methods? Well, so yeah, she is back in Thailand, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to a seminar with George St. Pierre? Especially like wrestling or like cage wrestling. There's no better fighter in MMA to teach you about wrestling than George St. Pierre. So for sure, I don't know if Whaley went to the seminar or not. I don't remember if she did or not, but I mean, I don't care. I would go. I don't care if I'm John Jones. I would definitely go to a GSP seminar. That would just be so crazy to have him in the room, acting as your teacher, even just for an hour or two would be really valuable. So yeah, it's cool. I have noticed that after Strickland said his comments to Alexander K. Lee, it gave people the excuse to write horrible things in the comments, whether it was homophobia, xenophobia. Sorry, lost my place there. Xenophobia or just vitriol. Would you ever do a project to research why the MMA fan base is the way it is? I've thought about that. I thought about that the other day as I was thinking through how MMA fans became so politically polarized. And the different, I mean, it didn't feel like it used to be that way, but also social media didn't used to be this way. It's like sometimes this kind of goes back to the John Anik thing of like, is it, or what you asked about, like clickbaity stuff, is it specifically the culture of MMA, or is it the wider cultural moment that we're in that is trickling down to MMA? I think a little bit of both. I think that MMA does lend itself to some of these characteristics of the fan base, because I don't know if these same things are happening in other sports, but at the same time, social media in general is a hotbed for political polarization, for hot takes, for people being a lot more bold than they would be in real life to say hurtful things. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I wouldn't mind doing that. I just think at the same time, so much of that would be, it would be conjecture, right? Because you can't prove necessarily this is why the MMA fan base is the way that it is. And I just want to say, like, if you're watching this and you have more conservative viewpoints, then hey, you're welcome here. I'm not necessarily putting you on blast at all, but yeah, and I personally, I try not to follow. I try not to just like follow one political agenda or another, but it is very interesting, and I think it's like both what the sport of MMA is that lends itself to this certain kind of fan base, but I think it's also like a top-down thing of a lot of like the leaders, the people that are figureheads in MMA, both promoters and fighters, that kind of self-reinforce that rhetoric. But I think a project like that, it would have to be a lot of hypothesis and conjecture, because it may be kind of hard to prove certain things when it's so big and broad. But that would be really interesting. I'm sure there's other media members that are having those same conversations and thinking through similar kinds of projects. And so, yeah, for sure. I think that would be a good project to like collab with other people and do like a collaborative project, because that's a really big question to ask, I think. So what I'm looking forward to is your Jong versus Yan breakdown video. Yeah, I've been like scheduling that today, working on my YouTube schedule, and how you're going to need to fluff up Xiaonan's striking ability. Fair enough. I have watched her film, and she is very one note. Fair enough. When I say one note, I mean that she attacks in the same rhythm and has predictable attack patterns. Well, I will definitely be looking for that. And that's a question that I will be asking in that video. Is she too predictable? And if she is, I hope that I can pick up on that. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. I do. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. I'm looking into getting into that. Especially like I've done a couple things on Weili in the past, and so I'm looking forward to maybe taking another step deeper and looking at her skills, especially now that we have the Limoges fight to pick apart. So for sure, I'm looking forward to that too. Has anyone ever done a story on the UFC PI in Shanghai? How would you be able to film that if YouTube is banned in China? Would it be very complicated? Two things with that. First of all, I could still film it and then post it after the fact. Second of all, VPNs. And I don't know if this is true, but I heard that there was like a special administrative region of Shanghai where social media was not blocked. I don't know if that's true, but guys, like look at how many Chinese MMA fighters post to their Instagram. Like they word has gotten out, especially among a lot of Chinese MMA fighters that post on social media, on Instagram. They post a lot more on Douyin, so that Instagram isn't like the first thing they run to post to, but there's definitely a lot of fighters that do that. So they know how to work around it. When I lived in China, I had a VPN and was able to do all that stuff. So I would definitely I would do the same thing probably, is just get a VPN. So that's how I do it. I don't think that I've seen, there has been little exposés on YouTube or on Chinese social media networks where they have walked around the PI and done that. But, I'd want to do it my own way. I'd want to be able to ask my own questions, be able to just explore different parts of the facility and kind of tell my own story with that. And so I don't think there's been a whole lot of like media members that are English speaking that have gone over and toured it before. I think they kind of looked at it. There may have been one or two when it first opened in 2019, but it really doesn't get a whole lot of play from media members since then. And probably some of that is because of COVID restrictions. The last couple of years, there hasn't been a lot of activity going on in China overall on the UFC front. So, but yeah, I'm hoping my hope is to go to China this fall and kind of hit Indonesia, Thailand in the same run potentially. But yeah, going to China, would definitely love to go tour the PI, get to hang out with athletes, take some photos, all that stuff. So that'd be fun. Speaking of Wu Yanan, I'm not sure if you know this, but the Zhangwei Li chat group are not allowed to make memes about Wu Yanan. That's probably for the best, right? Did you know she gets made fun of? And yeah, I have heard that, and I've seen, not just heard that, I've seen that in chat groups too. So I think that's good. What's the point? What do we have to gain? I know people like to poke fun at Yan Xiaonan for different things. And you're entitled to your opinion if you're not a fan of her style or her personality. But at least with that, it's like she's fighting Weili for the belt. Not that I'm excusing like mean behavior, but it's like what do you have to gain from making fun of Wu Yanan? So I think that's for the best. One of the things Ghost taught me in the early days of MMA was that disagreements and healthy discussion is a good way to learn more about the sport of MMA. Exactly. Is that something you agree with one of the things he told me was that as long as we respect each other during these discussions, we can. Exactly. That's what I'm saying, guys. I mean, sometimes you all will give me opinions that I disagree with, but man, it's like the fact that you're on my live chat and the fact that because it keeps me from being in an echo chamber. And sometimes you all present to me ideas and arguments that I haven't thought of before, or maybe I'll disagree with you on the spot, but then I'll think about it a little bit more. I literally have my knowledge of MMA and even combat sports as a whole has gotten a lot bigger and better because of this podcast, because this is a discussion between lots of people. And most of us in this chat are fans of John. We know that. Like, it's not, this is probably an echo chamber in some ways, but at the same time, you all present different angles on things. And even if one of you didn't like Wei Li and wanted to tell me why and how Jan was going to win, I would love to know that, just because that would present a different way of thinking about something. And I always, with the exception of like people that just make like hurtful and mean comments to tear people down, like I always want to have a space where people can feel comfortable to share their opinion, even if it's unpopular or unlikely. I totally agree with that. You said you didn't read your question correctly, James. The hot take era, not hot era. Oh, I see. It is, I think it is a hot take era, although there have been hot takes for a long time. I don't know if we're in an era. I do think that there have been hot takes for a long time. Even going back to in 2020, do you remember when Stephen A. Smith, after the Donald Cerrone Conor McGregor fight, just went on blast against Donald Cerrone, saying that it was a pathetic performance, all that, and a lot of people were mad about that because that was a really hot take. But there, in Shannon Sharp and Skip, whatever that show was, Skip and Shannon or something, there's always been hot takes. I think the platforms, I think more and more people are using social media than before. More and more people have their own page. People are feeling more and more bold. So I think it's just an amplification of what we had before. But I think there's probably always been people making hot takes, but more so now than ever before. Rio saying, I asked this on Sound and Pound. How funny it would be to see Dern get KO'd by Limoges. Do you think Dern took that fight because she can do to Limoges what Wei Li did? As you know, I don't like Mackenzie Dern. Yes, you've made that clear, because after every loss I see her in MMA fighting and MMA on point, making excuses for her to say if she did something different, she would be a world champion. Well, I would say that's a reason not to like those two publications, but I don't personally have anything against Mackenzie Dern. I don't have any reason not to like her. There's only a couple fighters that if they got knocked out, I would like find personal joy and amusement from, which that usually is a sign to me that I shouldn't communicate that because then that goes back to the toxicity side of things. But it is a very interesting fight. Dern, her takedown attack is not nearly what Wei Li's is. So if she's able to get Limoges to the ground, I think she's going to submit her. If not, then yeah, I think Limoges is going to pick her apart. I think it'll be more of a typical grappler versus striker match, especially after what Dern showed us in her last fight, but especially after what Limoges showed us in her last fight. Could be a tough run for Limoges, honestly, but it's an easier fight for her than Suarez. That is definitely for sure. That I feel like was going to be pretty ugly and extremely one-sided if that fight actually happened. All right. Let's see. Just a few more here. What is the name of the JCK champion that trains out of Black Tiger MMA? That is Wang Xiaoxiang. Wang, you know how to spell that. And then Xiao, Shaoxiang. Wang Xiaoxiang is his name. Bantamweight champion with JCK. Very underrated Chinese prospect. Good wrestler. Smashes people on a really good run right now. And who knows what's next for him? Could Road to UFC be an option? I think that would be perfect for him. I think that he should be at the top of the list for Chinese bantamweights. For sure. I'll tag you on X, Whaley, going to the GSP seminar. Thanks. I think you know this from Makoto, but in the John Whaley chat group, we actually aren't allowed to trash any opponent. You're the only Westerner in that group, right? I saw... I can't remember which one it is. One of the ones I'm in, I know there's at least one other Westerner in there. I would love to engage with that group more, but it's just like I wake up and there's like 300 new messages, and I'm like, gosh, I'm late to the party every day. So, but I do look at it every day because I find it really valuable. If my time zone was different, I would love to engage a little bit more in that group, but it starts up when I'm starting to go to bed, and then it is done by the time I get up. So unfortunately, it's just kind of weird hours, but I appreciate that. I think it's great that people aren't allowed to trash other fighters like that. What is Wang Xiaoxiang's striking like Whaley's? No harm here, but his last name is Shiao or Shao X, and then you got the last part right. That I'm not so sure. He's been pretty heavy on his wrestling his last couple fights, but I don't know if I can give you a good gauge. I don't know that it is. I need to look into that. For a while, he was kind of flying under the radar on like kind of more prelim-y, lower level fights, and then it was just his last couple fights that he fought really good competition. And then he fought Dooley La twice, and Dooley La is a Mongolian Chinese guy who's a really good wrestler, and he out-wrestled him and just outworked this guy. So not always the most flashy performances, but really effective. So I don't know if he's gonna. I don't know what his success is like. I need to look at his. Ooh, that's a fun idea for a video. Is Wang Xiaoxiang, because I could probably use a little bit more. I could actually probably use some fight footage in that, because JCK really likes me, and I've never had a problem posting their stuff on my social media. Maybe I'll do that. I'm interested in watching Wang fight. Some more information would be great. That's something I need to look into. I think partially he's just really stuck to his wrestling the last couple fights, and so I don't really have a good grasp on what his striking system is like. But TBD for the future for me. Thanks for hanging with me on this episode, guys. I know it was different. Not quite the bells and whistles that I usually have, but we'll be back at it next week. Unless my computer dies, then I'll be on my phone again. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because I do not want to buy a new computer at this point in life. Anyways, appreciate everything. 1-165 this weekend. JCK Kings 3 this weekend. UFC is off, but we'll talk to you next week on the podcast, and enjoy the fights.